Excellent. I'm going to shift into an area now that really talks about climates and cultures. Brother Hargrove will come to you first, and then Brent, that will really, these kind of are clumped together. Brother Hargrove, how do you create a climate that is receptive to the implementation of God's voice through you?
Well, I'm certainly no expert in the area, but I'll offer my thoughts and observations. I do believe that there is a spiritual ecosystem that sets our priorities, arranges our desires, puts us on purpose, and helps us to get to our ultimate goal or place in life. We call it destination. And I believe as we use the principle of the law of first mention, you can go back to the original creation of where God puts man, and you can see this ecosystem. Inside this ecosystem, God places man in Eden. Eden means a delightful place in the presence of God. God has restructured that for us, a delightful place in the presence of God. He gives to him a purpose, and he says, here's your job. Take care of this garden. He is called to be the manager of resources. As he is a manager of resources, his primary duty is to love the kingdom and love the king and propagate it. And as he does, operate in this what I call value-driven environment. As he operates in it, it is an ecosystem that brings about everything that God has for him. It has a God gravity about it. He violates this ecosystem, and when he violates this ecosystem, he changes his values. And when he changes his values, he loses his purpose. When he loses his purpose, he is cast out, and we see the transition into what I call a performance-driven environment, where man no longer manages resources, but man tries to manage man. And when man tries to manage man, man kills man. Man was never called to manage man. Man was called to manage resources. We're called to live in an environment that is value-driven, where we manage resources, we have a drive from God, and we have a desire to fulfill it that comes from this value system. I was sitting in a class a number of years ago when this came to me, and it revolutionized my life and changed the way I do ministry. I was sitting in a class listening to a professor, and as he was talking, my mind drifted, and I went into one of these God moments, and God started talking to me, and he said, knowledge will create interest. Interest will develop desires. Desires will set your priorities. Your priorities will determine your direction, and your direction will ultimately determine your destination. Now, I'll show you how that works. Tiger Woods, when he was 3 years old, his dad gave him the knowledge of golf. He's got an interest in golf. He wanted to play golf all the time. He got a desire so strong that it rearranged his priorities. He wanted to play golf all the time. When he got out of school, he played golf. He played golf all the time. As he changed his priorities, it determined his direction. When you see Tiger Woods putting on the green jacket and holding up the trophy, I don't think Tiger Woods had that in mind at the age of 3. But his values set his direction. Now, we're sitting in a wonderful church here, and I've had an opportunity this week to do a little brief case study on some things about this church. This church is it has a value-driven environment. And the way I know that, I visited with some of the ushers and greeters here, Brother Shock, Brother Mangan, and I've talked to them, and some of them have taken a whole week's vacation just to be here to serve us. It's amazing to me. The reason why is because there's a value that's driving them. And in this value-driven environment, you don't have to motivate. When you move into a performance-driven environment, you get into what Brother Shock was just talking about, acquisition, recognition, and sensation. Those are the 3 things that drive a performance-driven environment. But in a value-driven environment, you don't have to do a lot of motivating. You don't have to do a lot of encouraging. You don't have to recognize. You don't have to give things. You don't have to offer sensations, because that environment drives itself. It drives itself. I recognize the transfer of this environment into our culture. And of course, the culture, the philosophy determines the culture. The culture will ultimately determine the organizational behavior. And what we see here is an organizational behavior that is value-driven. I noticed this a number of years ago. I came into the office on a Monday morning, which most of us preachers, we don't like to do very, very often. But I came in early, about 6 o'clock in the morning. When I walked into the building, I looked through the building. I recognized that the lights were on in the restrooms. And so I walked around to the restrooms and looked in, and there was one of the doctors in our church, Dr. Cyril. And I said, Dr. Cyril, what are you doing? He said, I'm cleaning the restrooms. I said, why are you cleaning the restrooms? He said, Pastor, I do this every Monday morning. I said, why do you do it? He said, I value this place. And I value what happens here. And when I looked around, his little son comes out of one of the stalls, and I said, what is he doing? He said, I'm teaching him to value this place. A value-driven culture where we, first of all, the way we create this value-driven culture is we love and promote the King and the kingdom. Second, I think one of the things that we are missing in this hour as Christians, I'm talking about Christianity as a whole, is we're over-contextualizing the gospel. I think we need a Christocentric message that puts Jesus at the center. If we will first knowledge and then interest and then value, that we will put Jesus at the top and re-magnify him as the King of the kingdom and propagate the kingdom, there will be a value-driven environment that will automatically implement the message. The voice of God that's coming to us will go through us. Brother Shaw.
Very good, Brother Hargrove. Very good. Great words. Great words.